37 tips from a senior front-end developer. A few of you sent me this and said it was pretty helpful and wanted my opinions on it, so let's talk about it. So this is from this guy here, shout out to him. Don't know how to pronounce the name, so I'm not going to try. But anyways, let's get into the tips. So number one is master the fundamentals. 100% agree. You all have heard me talk about this a lot. I do not think you should try to learn something like React if you do not have a good fundamental understanding of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You should think of libraries and frameworks and all of these different types of things as sort of shortcuts, as ways to do things more efficiently and ways to make things easier to do. However, they should not replace the fundamentals. You should not be doing things with these frameworks that you couldn't figure out how to do vanilla. That doesn't mean you need to do them vanilla. Most of the time you won't. However, you should just have that fundamental understanding. And if you don't, it's going to become very limiting in the long run. All right, so next it says, understand how the web works. Front-end development has become more complex in the past few years. Numerous tools are used, bundlers, transpilers, etc. If you don't understand how the web works, i.e. the only languages supported are HTML for structure, CSS for styling, and JavaScript for interactivity, you'll struggle to understand why there's a need for so many tools to run your code online. Yeah, so I mostly agree with this, and honestly, this is somewhere that I struggle a bit too. I actually don't have that deep of an understanding of things like bundlers and transpilers. I know enough, I know sort of a surface level amount, but I'm honestly not the best person to do something like set up your Webpack config. It's just not something I'm an expert in and something I feel like I need to learn more about. Additionally, I would even go further than these tools and say that you need to understand how the web works from a very high level. You should understand things like HTTP and HTTPS, as well as things like DNS and just essentially what happens when you type a URL into the browser. You should understand that entire process. And I think this is important for a lot of reasons, but one of the main ones is that when we are debugging and trying to improve performance of our websites, oftentimes this knowledge will come into play and be very important. All right, so next it says get familiar with data structures and algorithms. Data structures and algorithms often get a bad rap due to coding interviews. Yet, it is crucial to understand the key ones and their complexities. Without this knowledge, you won't be able to code complex programs or evaluate your code efficiency. Below is a non-exhaustive list of data structures and algorithms to know. All right, so this one, honestly, I disagree with a little bit. So I do think it's important to know for a few reasons. The biggest one, to be honest, coding interviews. If you want to get a job, at least at the present moment, most likely you're going to need to know data structures and algorithms. I also think it's important because they sort of teach you how to think a little bit and how to build efficient programs. However, these aren't really things you're going to use very often. I've never used dynamic programming in a real code base, and I can't think of any reason I would ever need to. I don't know that I've ever used a greedy algorithm. I might have used recursion like one time. These just aren't things that you use very often. And same thing, honestly, for the data structures. Stacks and queues I've maybe used a couple times. Hash maps I do actually end up using a decent amount. Same thing with sets. Graphs I don't think I've ever used again other than maybe GraphQL. Most of these things just are more academic than they are actually useful. However, again, I do still think they're important to know because of those coding interviews and because they do teach you different ways to write programs and just make you a more well-rounded developer, even if you're not actually using these on a day-to-day basis. All right, next up, learn by doing rather than reading and watching. Tutorials trick you into feeling like you're making progress. Again, 100% agree with this. It's easy to watch a tutorial and be like, wow, I just watched somebody build this thing. Now I know how to build the thing. But then you go to actually do it and you don't know. You haven't learned anything. All you've learned is how to watch somebody else do something. And they also sort of show you this perfect path where they start and they write some code and then they finish. But in reality, software development is much more iterative. You write some code, something doesn't work, you debug a bit, then you write some other code, then you come back to it. And it's just this whole process of sort of thinking through these problems that you don't get with a tutorial because you're just following it step by step. Now, that's not to say tutorials are bad. I love tutorials. I've made some tutorials, and I think they're very helpful, but they do need to be sort of mixed in with this idea of learning by doing. So by actually building things and not just following these tutorials step by step. One recommendation I always have is to find some tutorial as sort of a starting place. So use a tutorial, follow along with it, make sure you understand it all, and then build something on top of that tutorial. So build out some features that aren't part of the tutorial to allow yourself to do something more unique. Number 5, ask for help when you are stuck. You are not alone. Chances are you have senior developers nearby whom you can ask for help. So I don't know if this is always true. If you work at like a big tech company, this is going to be true. And I agree, ask for help very often, probably more often than you are currently asking for help. But unfortunately, this isn't the reality for everybody. Whether you're somebody who's just now learning how to code and you're sort of doing it on your own, in which case there might not be anybody to ask, or You might just be working at some small, tiny little startup where there's 1 or 2 developers and there's not a whole lot of opportunities to actually ask questions. That can be a little bit harder, but if you do have this opportunity, I would say absolutely ask as many questions as you can. Now, this part I would disagree with a tiny bit. It says don't waste time going down rabbit holes. Your goal is to provide value, and you're not achieving that if you're wasting time tackling issues others have already addressed. So from a business perspective, yes, this is true. And I think this is mostly true most of the time, right? If you've spent, say, 30 minutes on something and you're not able to figure it out, it's probably better to ask somebody for help, especially if there's somebody that you know will know how to do it in like 30 seconds. It's just not worth the time to spend endless amount of time sort of trying to figure it out. However, if the ultimate goal is to become the best developer possible, sometimes those rabbit holes are actually kind of useful. They might not be the most productive way to build software. If the goal, again, is getting promoted, building software as fast as possible, then avoid the rabbit holes as much as you can and just ask for help when you need it. However, when the goal is learning, some of the best learning I've actually done has been going down some of those rabbit holes. Of course, you don't want to go down every single rabbit hole, but from time to time, I actually think it can be a good thing. So generally speaking, from a high level, I would agree with this advice, but just say that there is a bit of nuance to it. Okay, next, ask for help the proper way. So before asking for help, you should have done the bare minimum. Absolutely agree. There's nothing that's more annoying as a developer than when somebody asks you for help and all they're essentially asking you to do is to do the work for them. When they haven't really tried anything, they're just sort of giving up 2 minutes in and they haven't done anything. That's when you don't really want to help somebody. But if you do these things that's saying, so first sort of just search for solutions online, Stack Overflow, Google, ChatGPT, understand what exactly it is you're trying to do and what you are sort of failing to be able to figure out how to do, so what's not actually working, and keeping a record of these failed attempts are all good things that you should be doing before asking for help. So these are ways to show that you've actually put in that effort to figure it out on your own, and it makes it easier for somebody to help you because it's easier for them to understand the thought process you've had and where there was potentially something incorrect there. And this is a really good point too. Don't repeatedly ask for help for the same things. When you get help, note it somewhere so you don't forget it. And I think this also comes to how you ask for help. If you say, hey, I can't figure this out, can you do it for me? Then you're going to have to do that again and again because you're not actually learning. So instead of just asking somebody to do something for you, make sure you're asking them to actually teach you how to do it so that the next time you can do it on your own. Next up, we have don't copy paste code that you don't understand. This is seriously bad for various reasons. You might end up with insecure code that exposes sensitive information like tokens. You won't be able to debug the code easily, and you won't be able to explain it to your colleagues. This is particularly concerning with ChatGPT, as it sometimes provides only 80% accurate answers. Yeah, absolutely agree. Don't copy code that you don't understand. This also just means that you're not learning. If you're copy and pasting code and then just moving on because it seems to work, you're not going to learn why that code does what it does, and you're not going to actually progress to the point where you don't have to keep copy and pasting as much code. That said, now that we have tools like ChatGPT, one thing I like to do is find some code online, whether it be somewhere like Stack Overflow, and if I don't understand it, I'll paste it into ChatGPT and say, hey, I don't understand this code. Can you explain it to me line by line? And it's actually usually pretty good at doing that so that you can build that understanding yourself. All right, don't blindly apply every piece of advice found online. I made this mistake when I started. I came across advice saying memorization in React was evil, so I stopped using it. Yeah, I think I've seen this advice too before, and it at times can be good advice, but also at times it's bad advice. And it says here, his code crashed in pre-production, so don't be old meat. So yeah, think about, does this advice apply to me? And is the person advising in a similar context to mine? Exercise common sense. Yeah, I agree with this. And I think this goes beyond coding. It goes to your whole career and really anything in life. You're going to ask people for advice all the time. I ask people for advice all the time on coding things, but also on non-coding things, whether it be this YouTube channel and business or just life in general. And oftentimes that advice is super useful. I take it to heart and I actually do something with it. But other times I say, you know what, this is good advice. I appreciate that this person gave me this advice, but I don't think it applies as well to my particular situation. So I'm going to sort of keep it in mind, be appreciative, but end up doing something else in the long run because ultimately I understand my context and my situation better than they're going to understand it. Next, we have assume good intent. People want you to succeed. Yeah, I would generally agree with this. I think most people in general just want everybody to succeed. I haven't really come across anyone in my career who felt like they were trying to sabotage me or something like that. And I think sort of the opposite thinking sometimes comes from this idea that everybody's main priority is themselves, which I think is mostly actually true. And even if you think all of the people around you are super self-centered and they don't care about you at all, it is still going to be the case that it is in their best interest to help you. Right? So your manager is going to look better if you perform better. That's sort of how managers are evaluated. Your team is all going to look better as a whole if you succeed. So really, it's just in the best interest of everybody for you to be succeeding. So most people are just going to have good intents and are going to be trying to help you where they can. Done is better than perfect. The pursuit of perfection often results in procrastination, a waste of time, overcomplexity, etc. So aim to ship and validate a V0 before pushing for more. Done is better than perfect. Absolutely agree. There's a really good book that touches on this called The Lean Startup. I'll link it down in the description. But part of it is sort of about this idea of getting an MVP out as early as possible. So sort of the minimal viable product. So doing the bare minimum of building a product to just get something done before you perfect it. And we see this talked about a lot specifically with startups, but I think it actually applies to pretty much any developer work. The most impactful work you do is that V0 work, going from zero to some product. Then the next most impactful work you're going to do is going from sort of version 0 to version 1. Then version 1 to version 2 is going to be a little bit less impactful, and so on and so forth. This is essentially just diminishing returns as you build more stuff. Additionally, you don't want to be building all of that more stuff if you haven't figured out what people like and what people don't like. So if you haven't gotten something out there to begin with, what you think is perfect might not actually be perfect, and you're just going to end up wasting a lot of time. All right, next up, always break tasks into manageable ones. The easiest way to feel overwhelmed, trying to bite more than you can chew. So break tasks into smaller tasks. Absolutely agree. This is something I do with all of my projects. I break them down into very, very small tasks, usually things that take anywhere from like 30 minutes to a few hours. That way it feels like I'm just constantly making progress and there's always something to work on rather than having this big overwhelming thing to work on and not really knowing what to do next. Be trusted to reach out when you need help. So when starting out, your top priority is earning your manager's trust. That's interesting. I've never really heard it framed in that way, but I think I generally agree with this to some extent. You don't want to become that person, like it says here, that essentially needs to be micromanaged. You want to be somebody who's trusted to get their work done and to reach out when something's not going to work. So for example, if you're going to be behind on some project, you want to be the person who proactively reaches out to management ahead of time and is like, hey, I think this is going to fall behind. What do you think we should be doing about it? And when you start doing that, you do sort of build up more trust with your management team, and that's just generally a good thing. All right, show enthusiasm for the work. You can make up a lot of shortcomings with enthusiasm. When you're new, be eager and excited. Only experienced devs can afford to lack enthusiasm. No one wants to constantly push someone to work. Mentoring is tough enough. Already having to motivate somebody makes it more challenging. To be honest, I sort of agree with this. Like, I think enthusiasm is a good thing, but at the same time, it's sort of hard to fake in a way. And I don't know that I would recommend faking enthusiasm and trying to have enthusiasm for something that you're just not enthusiastic about. At the end of the day, work is work, and work's not always going to be the most perfectly fun thing. So I don't know. Let me know what y'all think about this. I have sort of mixed opinions. But anyways, next up, stay open to learning new things, tools, and methods. Front-end development is constantly evolving. That might be the biggest understatement I've ever seen. So you need to be open to jumping to new technologies. Don't cling too tightly to your current tools. Instead, show an appetite for learning. So yeah, I would agree with this. Always be open to learning new things, especially within front-end development. But at the same time, I would also say, don't feel like you have to learn absolutely every new thing that comes out. Oftentimes you'll be using something older and it's still going to work just fine. So don't feel like you have to know absolutely everything, but it is important to sort of stay up to date as best as possible. All right, next up, master your dev tools. So good thing with this is that a lot of it will just come naturally, but that said, I do think it's important to actually become very good with your IDE and the inspector in your browser specifically. Source control, I don't think matters nearly as much, to be honest. Like, I'm not some expert in Git, but I have never really felt that that's making me a slower developer in any way. But what is very important is being proficient in VS Code or whatever IDE you use, as well as understanding the inspector super well. I've honestly met a ton of front-end developers who just aren't very good with the inspector and their browser in general. So this is something that I would definitely recommend just taking some time to do a bit of a deep dive into and learning a little bit better. All right, focus on delivering value. Don't write code in a vacuum. Every code you write should provide value to your customers, your company, your stakeholders, etc. Your compensation is tied to the value you provide, not the code you write, so prioritize writing effective code that serves a purpose. Yeah, so when I was at Meta, the term they used for this is focus on impact, and I think it's super important, particularly if your goal is getting promoted and just doing well in your job. Focus on delivering actual value. This doesn't mean don't write good code, but at the same time, nobody higher up in the management chain cares all that much about those little things. They care about the features you ship and the impact you're having on the customers and stakeholders and all of these things. So that's what you should be focusing on the most as well. Advocate for your work. It won't speak for itself. Probably one of the most common mistakes for new devs, especially if you come from a culture valuing modesty. You've done something remarkable, nobody knows about it, that work won't matter. So share your work through writing, demos, etc. Yeah, this was hard for me when I first started. I felt sort of awkward sharing my work, like, it doesn't matter that much, and people who need to know about it will find out about it. But this is so important. You need to be a self-advocate. You need to show your stakeholders the work you've done. You need to show management the work you've done. You need to let people know that you're doing this amazing work. Otherwise, essentially, you're not getting credit for it. It would be like being in school and writing an essay and never even turning it in. It doesn't matter that you wrote the essay. If you don't turn it in, you're not going to get any credit for it. All right, prefer writing dumb code over clever code. Code is read much more often than it is written. That's interesting. I guess that's probably true. So refrain from writing clever code that only you can understand. Absolutely agree. Readability is more important than performance, is more important than cleverness. You want your colleagues to work with your code efficiently, assist you if necessary, etc. Yeah, absolutely agree. And oftentimes, when we're in school, we learn about ways to make our code more performant. So that feels like the most important thing. And I've talked about this a lot. It's usually not. Sometimes performance is super important, right? Like if you're doing some very low-level work, performance might be the most important thing. But in most code bases, readability is much more important than performance because it's going to allow you to build features better. And what matters to our users? Features, building the actual product out. But you might be saying, but if the code is super slow, performance matters to our users as well. They're not going to use it if it's super slow. And this is true as well. However, the vast majority of performance improvements do not actually come from the code itself. Usually, writing readable code is not going to be mutually exclusive with writing performant code. And clever code is oftentimes going to be less performant than that more readable code. And the vast majority of the time, the biggest performance gains do not actually come from our code itself. They come from high-level thinking on things like system design and how we can minimize trips to the server and databases and all of these things that actually take a lot of time. So focus on performance there, but most of the time in your actual code, focus on readability above everything else. Your manager is your best ally. Unless you're exceptionally unlucky, your manager is there to support you and your growth. Absolutely agree. I've always had good managers. The unfortunate reality is some people will have bad managers, but most of the time your manager is there to help you succeed and they're going to try to help you grow. That said, you do need to actually be putting in the effort. You need to be open with them about what exactly your goals are and how they can help you achieve those goals. Because if you're not open about these things, then it's going to be nearly impossible for them to actually help you. And yeah, always make sure to share your wins with them as well as setbacks as well, because ultimately your manager is going to be the main person who's sort of advocating for your promotions and all of these things, and they need to understand all of the work that you're actually doing. All right, make your manager's life easier. This one's easy but often overlooked, so your manager likely has issues you can assist with. They might need to add documentation but lack time, their workload could be overwhelming and they need support, and more. This is probably the simplest way to earn your manager's support for promotions, raises, etc. They're already aware of the tasks and can directly see their impact, at least for them. World's best boss. Yeah, I would agree with this for the most part. I think oftentimes the biggest impact you can have on getting those promotions and better performance ratings and all of these things oftentimes come from these little things. So you get all of your main tasks done, but sort of the things that can sort of push you over the edge just a little bit further is adding things like documentation that other people don't have the time to do. So just doing a little bit extra can go a very long way, as well as just can sort of get you on your manager's good side, which of course is good. All right, next up, understand the big picture behind your tasks. Don't be a code monkey. It might serve you well when starting, but to reach the next level, you need to understand the context behind your tasks. Why are they valuable? Why you were assigned to them? How they fit the company's overall strategy. This understanding is essential for advancing to the next level of your career. Honestly, I don't have a whole lot to say about this one, but absolutely agree with it. Contribute to the team. documentation, tech talks, demos, etc. This benefits not just the company, but also you. By conducting demos, sharing documentation, etc., you showcase your skills and enhance the team's productivity. Always aim to uplift your team's performance as much as possible. It's enjoyable and rewarding. Yeah, I agree with this, especially if you do enjoy it. You will find it very rewarding. And ultimately, if you do these things, it can help the entire team succeed. And typically, when the team succeeds, you succeed as an individual as well. Become the go-to person in a specific area. If I had to offer just one tip, it would be this. At the beginning of your career, exploring various areas is okay. However, to advance to mid and senior levels, focus on building expertise in one area. This is more compelling for promotions than being average in multiple areas. Yeah, this is something I've said a lot. I think it's very important to become the subject matter expert on something. We said earlier that you need to be asking for help on different things when you need that help. Well, you should also be trying to become the person that other people ask for help for certain things. So for example, for me, that slowly over time became JavaScript. It was something that I knew very well, and people started asking me for help on JavaScript related things. And sometimes this gets more specific or more broad, but just generally speaking, being that go-to person and sort of the expert on that one thing is very important to getting those promotions. All right, next up, develop your communication skills. Unfortunately, this is a must. Communication is vital for developers. We often have to do the following: request for comments, demos, presentations, etc. So make sure you have a basic level of proficiency in communication. Yeah, absolutely agree. I don't think this is developer specific. I think communication is the most important skill in the entire workforce and pretty much any job. And just like any other skill, it takes practice to get good at it. So try to practice your communication skills as much as you can. Take breaks when you're stuck on a problem. It's tough to pause when you're deep into a problem. Even after 5+ years, I struggle with it. Yet I consistently generate fresher ideas after taking a break. So step away if you've been stuck for too long. I used to be the same way, where I would sort of just like head down, try to solve a problem until I got it finished. And then eventually I started doing this thing where when I get stuck on something, either I go to something else, or sometimes I just like step away from work entirely, go for a walk for like 20 minutes and come back. And oftentimes I found the solution when I wasn't even looking at my computer. So it's like I come back and just instantly have the solution somehow. So absolutely agree with this. Take breaks and try to sort of step back from a problem. That way you can think about it with fresh eyes when you get back to it. All right, work from your strengths, not your weaknesses. So stop wasting time trying to fix apparent weaknesses. If it takes you consistently greater than an hour to do a task that others at your level can accomplish in 5 minutes, steer clear of that task. Likely investing more energy won't make you exceptional at it. Instead, do the essentials and concentrate on maximizing your strengths. If something comes naturally to you and is valuable, do it more. I think I mostly agree with this, and it sort of goes into that idea of being a subject matter expert on something, in that if you're just focusing on your strengths, you can get really good at a few different things. You can kind of be the guy that does those things, and other people can do other things. This is also why we have things like project management and design, because oftentimes those are strengths of other people. So try to figure out what your core strengths are and try to do those things as much as you can. All right, take ownership of your career path. No one will plan your career for you, and without a plan, you'll be working for somebody else's plans. So make sure you create a plan for what you want to achieve in 1, 2, and 5 years. I think I agree with this sentiment, but also I would say try not to be too concrete in that career path. For example, if you asked me 5 years ago what I would be doing right now, what I'm currently doing is so far away from what I expected to be doing, but I love the path my career has taken, so be open to changing that career path. But like he says, take ownership of your path yourself, try to make some plan as much as you can, even if that plan isn't going to be exactly what ends up happening. It can be a good starting place, and then make good decisions for yourself over time of if you need to change that plan or not. Hang with other devs. Okay, interesting. Are you currently experiencing imposter syndrome? By the way, I have an interview I did on imposter syndrome a few weeks back, so highly recommend checking that out if you are interested. If so, spend some time with other developers. You'll quickly realize you're not alone. This is true. Connecting with other devs has additional benefits. You can pick up new tricks and tips. You can discuss shared experiences. You can complement each other's work, etc. Yeah, I think this is, for the most part, true. But at the same time, like, I wouldn't overemphasize it. Like, don't like force yourself to only be friends with developers or something like that. But I do think it's important to sort of have developer friends, and just in general, having friends who are in similar places to you in life that you can sort of share your experiences with, I think is just generally a good thing. All right, mentor younger devs. This is one of the top cures for imposter syndrome. Once you begin mentoring younger devs, you'll realize you know things, and you'll also establish yourself as a mid and senior developer. Yeah, I think this is true. Once you realize that, hey, I can teach something to somebody else, you sort of realize like, wait, does that mean that I know that thing pretty well? And of course, that is usually the case. So yeah, I think this is generally a good thing if you have the opportunity to do this. And it's almost funny because the mentorship is usually valuable to the mentee, but oftentimes it's actually more valuable to the mentor themselves. So I do think this is a good thing to do once you have that opportunity. All right, diversify the problems you solve. If you're constantly tackling the same issues, your progress will plateau. Ensure you're solving diverse problems so you can compare various approaches, develop a toolkit for problem solving, etc. Yeah, one question I've gotten before is, when is it time to leave a company or leave a team or something like that? And one answer I've given, and I think there's a lot of different answers for when it's best to leave a company, and it's very individualized. But one thing to look at is when you find that this is not the case, when you're just doing the same repetitive things over and over again, this is where you sort of stagnate in your career and you stop learning and you stop progressing. And that's when it's usually a good time to look for some kind of change. And sometimes that change can come internally without having to move at all, but sometimes it does mean you need to move to a different team or a different company to get that more diverse set of experiences. Find mentors. Having great mentors has been the highlight of my career. Mentors keep you grounded as they understand your journey, they guide you to avoid the mistakes they've made, etc. Yeah, so I have mixed opinions on mentors. I've done a few videos on mentorship before and sort of those mixed opinions I have, but I do think they can be valuable. Like he says, he found a lot of value in his mentorship, which is awesome. But also I'd say don't try to force mentorship. I too have found a lot of value in my life from mentorships, but honestly, almost none of the most valuable mentorships I've had have been people who have explicitly been called mentors. They're not people I've put those labels on, but rather just people who over time became mentors to me because they had skills I wanted to learn and they were willing to teach them to me. Or they had sort of gone through some of the things I'm currently going through and were willing to help guide me through that process. Commit to a JavaScript framework and master it. The best framework is the one that helps you achieve your goals the fastest. With solid JavaScript fundamentals, transitioning to another framework will be quick. Yeah, so I mostly agree with this. I think it's easy to get stuck in learning all of the new shiny things, but oftentimes it just doesn't matter. Like, you probably just need to use React for most things. And if you have that good fundamental understanding and one day you need to use Svelte or Vue or whatever the hot framework of the day is, you should be able to learn it very quickly, at least to get up to speed and be able to be somewhat productive. And then when you are working in that code base of, say, React, and React is the one that you know super well, you'll be able to be extra productive and sort of be that subject matter expert within that code base very quickly. And oftentimes people are surprised to know that I honestly don't know very many JavaScript frameworks. Frankly, React is the only one that I know very deeply. There's a lot that I've sort of used a few times. I've used Angular, I've used Vue, I've used Svelte, but I actually don't know any of them all that deeply. And I think that's perfectly okay. If I ever need to learn them very deeply, then I will, but I honestly haven't needed to. And having a deep understanding of React has served me extremely well in my career so far. Constantly think of the user experience. As a front-end developer, you should think about the user. Even if you have PMs or designers, ensure the user experience is nice. Use loading states when needed, communicate progress in the UI, give feedback to the user, etc. Yeah, one thing I think a lot of people are surprised about when they first start is that not everything's going to be designed for you. There's oftentimes little interactions that we build as front-end developers that weren't given to us by designers. And this can depend on your team and your company and the projects you're working on, but oftentimes as a front-end developer, it's just important to still think about the user experience and think about the things you can be doing to make that user experience better. And oftentimes, sometimes this also means collaborating more with the designers. So going back to them and saying, hey, what do you think about changing this to that? Be comfortable saying no. This is a tough one for me. I get excited about every project and struggle to decline, but as a developer, you'll often have more requests than you can manage. So prioritize the ones that align best with your goals. Yep, agree with this 100%. This is one of the things I've struggled with a lot as well. It's so easy to see all of these different things you could be working on and think, wow, if I did all of these things, I'm going to get this promotion and all of these things, everything's going to be amazing. But ultimately, you're just not going to be able to finish them all. So be comfortable saying no, set boundaries. Don't be the person who works 12-hour days just because you signed up for too many projects. Just be comfortable saying no, and like he says, prioritize the projects that are going to align best with your actual goals. Okay, so continuously invest in your skills. By choosing to become a front-end developer, you committed to a career in which you must continually learn. Therefore, keep investing in your skills by acquiring new languages, mastering new techniques, etc. Yep, I think this is mostly true. I think this is true of any development career, and really most careers, is that if you're not continually learning, you are continually falling behind. Now, this doesn't mean you need to take a new course every 3 months or something like that, but just try to stay up to date on things. All right, when faced with too much work, reduce the features versus the quality of the code. The more features your app has, the better, right? Right? Initially, this might seem true, but additional features lead to more code, and more code means more issues, maintenance, bugs, etc. So when pressed with time, trim features over sacrificing code quality. Yeah, I would agree with this. If you're going to do something, do it the right way, and if you don't have time to do something the right way, then you don't have time to do it at all. Strive to understand your collaborators, designers, backend developers, etc. Always show respect to your collaborators. App development is a team effort. The more synergy among team members, the happier and more effective the environment will be. Yeah, 100% agree, and this was a great post, so if you do want me to react to more stuff like this, let me know and send me any ideas that you think would be interesting. And if you're curious about that video on imposter syndrome I mentioned, you should watch that next right here.